Well, good morning. Very cold morning, winter has arrived. There are times when you wander around Glasgow and bits of it feel quite old. Like here in Royal Exchange Square, or here in Virginia Court. But it's not really that old. I think much of the stuff here's of varied date, but I imagine mostly the early 19th century or the late Georgian period. Not that old. And I think Glasgow in general has a Victorian feel to it. Most of the older buildings in the city are Victorian, and there's a few pockets of Georgian stuff like in Carlton Place and in other areas. But there's no medieval stuff. The city doesn't look old and quaint in the same way that Edinburgh's Old Town does. All that lovely jumbly old stuff. And the reason for that is because much of the city was swept away during any number of city improvements that I think started in the 1870s. I think there was probably two main bouts. In the 1870s and in the 1890s, although I can well imagine it was probably something of a continuous process. And the idea to improve the city was to do away with all the slums and just closely built housing in back courts, closes, wynds, and the general backlands off the main thoroughfares in the centre of Glasgow, all emanating from Glasgow Cross, High Street, Gallowgate, Saltmarket, Trongate and such like. The buildings fronting these streets were largely razed to the ground, including the backlands behind these frontages. So the end result was that kind of the old quaint Glasgow that maybe at one time had a medieval look to it just no longer exists. Bit of a shame, really. We can still get a flavour of what that old Glasgow, old with an E at the end of it, looked like, courtesy of sketches by a William Simpson dating to the 1840s. In them you can see some of the Georgian character that in a few places still exists in the city, but you can also see a quaint, old world kind of look of medieval stuff. All these kind of strange shaped buildings with external wooden stairs and a kind of architectural mishmash that sort of exemplifies just how nice kind of medieval streets and towns look. I mean, it can also get a flavour of some of these back courts and wynds and closes that were swept away, courtesy of actual photographs by a Thomas Allen, who was given the task of recording these back lanes and closes before they were swept away. And again, this is an insight into the old Glasgow that sadly just has gone. Of course, not all the lanes and backlands were swept away. There are a few survivors. Just off the Trongate here, you've got the old wynd and the new wynd, and this is back wynd. It used to run from Trongate all the way down to the Brigate, but as you can see, it's been sort of cut off, and it's just a short section that's left. Kind of modern brick building it just behind me there. And it's in these sort of lanes that you would have got any number of drinking dens. I'm not sure that I could use the word tavern. I think drinking den is probably a more apt description, because these would have been, I suspect, dives. A lot of them would have been illegal drinking dens. You know, these backlands and lanes, wynds were overcrowded, too many people and too many buildings, which is the reason why they were all swept away during the city improvements. So these were areas where you get a lot of criminal activity. Of the illegal drinking dens or shebeens, you probably get any number of raids by the authorities to try and kind of put a kind of dampener on this sort of activity. But the people who ran these places were pretty ingenious in their methods for concealing drink, and I'm sure they had any number of lookouts posted at various locations to give signs and signals that the authorities and the police were on their way. Hide the drink. We can actually see this lane back wind in one of Thomas Hannon's photographs, probably dating to the 1870s. You can see the old wheelbarrow in the lane. And what you can also see is a sign saying stage door. And that was attached to the Britannia, a panopticon music hall. And that building is still here, in addition to this little bit of lane. And you can still see just at the end there on the right-hand side where that stage door was. It's more a visitor attraction now than a music hall, and many a famous entertainer would have popped through that door in the old days. I think there's a sign there saying Stan Laurel. It was one of the people who performed in the Britannia. What you can also see, if you just look at that photograph, you can see a strange lamp in the lane. That's not one of the normal street lamps, and I suspect that's a lamp that sat above the door of a pub, some sort of drinking den. The fact that it's got a lamp announcing that it's there would suggest that it was above board, shall we say.
A Glasgow Post Office directory dating to 1870 gives us a further glimpse into Back Wynd. 2 taverns, or spirit dealers, are mentioned. Robert Hillcoat had a pub that was part of the Britannia building facing Trongate, so the lamp we can see in Annan's photo probably sat above the entrance to J. Cameron's pub at 55 Back Wynd. A later map of the 1890s shows that very pub. In another photo by Annan, we see a small barefoot boy in close number 18 off the Saltmarket. If we zoom in on the sign, we can see that this too was a pub. It's difficult to properly make out, but it may be the Globe Vaults, or the Globe Wine, Spirit and Malt Liquor Vaults.
One of the famous old inns of Glasgow was the Saracen's Head Inn. I think for most Glaswegians, they'll have heard of the Saracen's Head Inn, and they'll look at the old Saracen's Head pub there and think, well, maybe it was sort of there, you know, I used to just sit there. That's not quite right. The Saracen's Head Inn used to sit on the other side of the lane. That lane that sits beside the Saracen's Head pub used to be called Saracen's Lane. And the old inn used to sit between that lane and Great Dovehill. In other words, it just used to sit in this row behind me, behind all the buses and the traffic. Hopefully you can hear me. It didn't occupy that full block. It occupied the section at the corner of Great Duffield. There was a small bit just at the side of Saracen's Lane that wasn't part of the old inn, but it was nevertheless, that's where it was.
If we once again refer to old maps, John MacArthur's map of 1778 reveals exactly where the Saracen's Head Inn was located, right there on the east of Duffield Street. You can see steps leading to the main door and a courtyard to the rear. The old inn was converted into shops and apartments in 1792, hence why it looks slightly different in Peter Fleming's map of 1807, where the steps have gone. Old drawings and photos show the extent of the inn's frontage. It was all demolished in 1905, around the same time as the current Saracen's Head pub was built.
As you well know, I'm quite keen on stones. It's said that the Saracen's Head in the old inn was built using stone from I think a number of locations. It was all kind of second-hand stone, you might say. Some of it from one of the ports that used to be in this area. The East Port, I think, must have been a big stone thing with a gate in it. And also from the Bishop's Palace, up roughly where St Mungo's Museum is now. And, you know, when they pulled down the Saracen's Head Inn to replace it with this block of, I think, very early 19th century, very early 20th century, 1904, 1906 or something, tenements, you wonder what happened to the stone that the old inn was made from. Was it reused? Does it live on somewhere? It must have been good quality stone for a bishop's castle, you know. I sort of look at this and I kind of hope that some of it might be here in this wall on Great Duffield Lane, but on looking at it, I suspect not. But we can all dream.
Robert Burns stayed in the Saracen's Head Inn on a few occasions. In fact, just like Mary Queen of Scots, he stayed everywhere. He also stayed in the Black Bull Inn on Argyle Street, clearly shown in MacArthur's 1778 map, and more clearly on Peter Fleming's 1807 map, where all buildings associated with the hotel are highlighted. These days the site is an ugly Marks and Spencer building with a plaque in Virginia Street.
When you look at the first edition Ordnance Survey map dating to about 1857, before all the major improvements took place, you can see what old Glasgow was like, and it is completely different to what it's like after then. What I'll do in a moment is I'll fade between the first edition Ordnance Survey map of about 1857 and the second edition dating to the 1890s. And you'll see what I mean. I mean, it's just the changes are unbelievable. It's almost unrecognisable. This lane, for example, sits off Watson Street, which is just off, is that London Road? Keep getting mixed up between London Road and the Gallowgate. No, it's the Gallowgate, sorry. On the map, you can see that Watson Street wasn't at this location. And what actually, before the improvements, what sat in the course of what is now Watson Street used to be Black Boy Close, a name that harks back to the days of slavery. You know, slavery was only abolished about 25 years before the first edition order and survey map. And of course, with a name like Black Boy Close, it wasn't just harkened back to days of slavery. There was a pub called the Black Boy Tavern. I think it sat on the Gallowgate. There's a kind of rough sketch of it here when it had been transformed into shops, and I'm sure when it was a tavern it would have looked a bit more quaint and interesting than what this sketch shows.
It was not unknown for rich Glasgow families to have a small black boy or girl as a slave. Children who probably found themselves on life's scrap heap when slavery was abolished. If we return to Back Wynd and another photo by Annan, we can see a young black girl sitting among the ruins of a city being improved. The problem with improving Glasgow is that over a period of decades the whole city was practically razed to the ground. A combination of those improvements and the arrival of the railway, followed by 20th century developments, saw the obliteration of much of the city. This 1857 map, before the improvements, shows much of the city between Argyle Street and the River Clyde. If we then fade in an 1890s map, you can very quickly see the impact of the railways. And if we then fade in a modern image showing this in Enoch Centre, well, what can I say? Taverns and inns that were lost as a result of the railways and modern developments include the Garrick Hotel and Tavern, the Clydesdale Arms Inn, the Cossack Inn, the Eagle Hotel, the Sun Tavern, the Royal Oak Tavern, Pope's Eye Tavern, the Anchor Tavern, St Enoch's Tavern, New York Tavern, Imperial Hotel, Bridge Inn Hotel, and many more. Glasgow has never been short of a pub or two. If we return to those wonderful old sketches by William Simpson, we find ourselves looking west at the corner of Stockwell Street and Clyde Street. It gives a good idea of how old Glasgow looked, and there's bound to be a tavern in there somewhere. But a painting by another artist, Andrew Donaldson, dating to 1819, really immerses us in the past. It depicts a lovely thatched cottage in Stockwell Street, close to the river. The section on the left of the stairs apparently sold the best ale under the sun. I'm unsure if that meant the tavern was actually called the Sun. The Sun was a fairly popular name for taverns in the old days. We've already seen one in the Backlands between the Old Wynd and the New Wynd. And a directory dating to 1789 mentions Thomas Cochrane, a dealer in spirits and ale at the sign of the Sun near the head of the Saltmarket. Certainly Donaldson's painting shows something that looks vaguely like a sun above the entrance. Fleming's 1807 map reveals other inns, like the Star Inn and Hotel in Ingram Street, and the Buck's Head Inn here in Argyle Street. The name Buck's Head is retained in this mid-19th century building, but the inn itself looked very different. For all that Glasgow has lost, we do have a few survivors. That is one. It was once Lambert's Hotel, seen here in an 1857 map. To be honest, That whole row looks like it's struggling, and I imagine we'll lose those buildings before long.
Well, I thought I'd end here. Sat at a window in the Victoria Bar in the Brigate. It's now part of the Clutha. This, like so many of Glasgow's tenements, this block has been cut down in size. It's just the one level now. But behind the bar there, they've got a 1950s photograph of how the tenement used to look. Not sure you'll be able to see that. And you can see the Victoria Bar in the window that I'm sat at just now. And this bar and this block of tenements is also shown in one of William Simpson's 1846 sketches, which I sort of started at the beginning of this video by mentioning, and I thought I would end the video by mentioning the sketch. This is that particular sketch. I'll show you right now. And there's the window that I'm sitting at right now. That's what you call a survivor. I'm Eddie Burns. Take care, and I'll see you again.